Thank you for being here today. I want to share some information with you about classroom management and rules and procedures. I consider the way a teacher manages the classroom and the rules and procedures that are established directly impact student success. So as we're going through the presentation today, I've included several slides that's going to focus on different strategies and things that a teacher can include in the learning environment to make sure there's going to be some academic success. Classroom management really has to do with us as teachers finding ways to establish a conducive, productive learning environment. It refers to a wide variety of skills and techniques that teachers are willing to engage in the classroom in order to maintain control while at the same time establishing relationships with the students. Classroom management. In our textbook, MAG, published in 2018, behavior management creates and maintains an environment conducive to student learning and teacher sanity. Let's think about that. When we think about teacher sanity, when you have that environment where you have a good relationship, a good rapport with the students, and everyone has accountability, it helps with both the student and the teacher in that learning environment. Behavior modification assumes those observable and measurable behaviors that are good targets for change through discipline and instruction. So when you do have this group of diverse students, it's going to be necessary that you have some type of modifications in place that when you have that behavior problem, you have strategies and techniques in place that's going to help you to remedy that problem and come up with strategies in order to make sure you're going to see some improvement over time. Because when we think about classroom management and behavior management tying in together, a smooth running classroom is the result of a teacher's ability to effectively teach the rules and procedures in their classroom. So when we think about those characteristics that we want to focus on for an effective classroom, we really want to think about how you're going to establish your rules. So first off, we want to make sure those rules, we have a small number of rules. You know, you don't want a long list of rules that you expect the students to remember and abide by. So you want to make sure your rules are small in number. You also want to make sure you get your students' input. That word accountability is very important. So when students have input on the rules and expectations, the procedures of the classroom, it adds that accountability and it helps to make sure both the students and the teacher are on the same page. And we always know that anytime we're establishing rules, we want to make sure we do it from a positive context. I remember doing research, some time back, and we always had to make sure whenever we word something, we have to make sure that we're wording it in a positive manner, okay? Be specific and clearly stated. Self-explanatory. When you want to establish rules, you don't want something that's very long and drawn out. You want to make sure you're clear to the point, have specifics in mind of what you expect of the students. And those rules should be displayed. They should be visual so that the students know they can see it. It's a reminder because of course you're going to teach these rules pretty much the very first day of school, but you also want to make sure that even during the progression of this semester or during the school year, that students are still able to see those rules. And necessarily, you have to go back and review the rules. Reinforce some of the rules that you're seeing that the students may not be abiding by. Teach those rules in the very beginning. That way, you're getting off to a very good start. Everyone knows the expectations. They can establish a routine, and you have a very productive learning environment. And you want to establish consequences. So when we say establish consequences, you want to have some type of procedure in place where if a rule is not followed, you have a way of trying to remedy that situation, but you want to be, a key word I want to use, you want to be consistent. So whatever you do for Johnny, the same thing needs to be done for Sally when a rule is not followed. So consistency is important when you're establishing both the rules and the consequences. teachers with effective classroom management skills find it necessary to establish and enforce a well-monitored system of rules and procedures that deter inappropriate and off-task behavior. This leads to increased student academic engagement and achievement. Now, when we think about this here, when you have a well-monitored system, meaning you have your rules in place, you have your consequences communicated to the students, when all that's communicated and everyone is understanding, then it's going to help you to eliminate, or students will deter from the inappropriate behavior, and they're going to want to do things that's going to be more positive. Because when we think about it, that off-task behavior really directly impacts student learning. Because when you have students that are not engaged, or they're doing things that's not abiding by your classroom management strategies, it's not only impacting you as a teacher and that individual student, but it's impacting everyone in that classroom. So when we think about establishing those procedures, classroom procedures help us have an orderly classroom that does directly with management. Students become more productive and successful, and students remain focused and learn more. We have to make sure that not only are we teaching the content, but we're establishing relationships with the students by communicating expectations. We're establishing that relationship with accountability, so that students want to come and learn, and they feel that they can focus when they do come to school and learn. So some examples of how we establish those clear rules. We want to make sure we have communicated with the students how you're going to come in and how you enter the classroom and how you exit. So when we say how you enter, I have a motto that is very important that I greet my students. So when they're entering, I want them to know that I appreciate them being there, and I want to make sure that I share with them that their learning is just as important to me as it is to them. So when they enter in, they know they come in an orderly manner. They also know that they come on in and have a seat. Most of the time we have a strategy where they already know what their task is, like a bell ringer or a drill or something that we do at the very beginning of the class. And I purposely do that so that they will go ahead and get settled. I don't tolerate a lot of talking and things as they're getting settled, because that's going to take away from instruction time. So they have a routine. They enter the room. We greet each other. They go ahead and get materials, whatever they need, and they have a seat in an orderly manner. And the same thing happens when it's time for them to leave class. They know that it's important that they do not dismiss themselves. They're dismissed by, we have a scheduled bell system here, and they know that they're not to leave or even get out of their seat until that time has come. So I do not allow a lot of idle time, even though they're not crunch time all during the day, but we have to make sure that we have a procedure in mind. So when they're exiting, they know that they're exited by me dismissing them, or that's communicated. Requesting assistance. We learned that early on. So even though this is the secondary level, even from elementary, you know that when you're needing assistance, you raise your hand. So that blurting out and things like that, that's not tolerated. So if you communicate that early on, it's going to help you to control your environment. It's going to help you so that you can keep students more focused. So having a way that students know how to request assistance. What's their normal procedure for turning in assignments? Do you have a certain place that they have to turn them in? Is there a certain method that you want on their documents or their assignments? Leaving the room during class. If something was to come up and a student needs to go maybe to guidance or to the office, a lot of times that's going to be as a need. Not just when the student wants it, but when it's a request from maybe guidance or the office. Because if we did not control that, it's going to be where students feel that I always need to go somewhere, and it's going to interfere with their learning environment for that day, and not just them, but the students that are next to them. So having a procedure in place for how you allow your students to leave, okay? Restrooms. A lot of teachers, a lot of us here, especially at the secondary level, we have in place where if a student needs to go to the restroom, have some kind of monitor system that we talked about earlier. Have a monitor system where they're not abusing that privilege, but they have a way of keeping track of how many times they leave the classroom. Because anytime a student leaves the classroom, they're missing out on vital information. Even if it's something from instruction or if it's individual work, that classroom time is very important. And as we're looking in, we have diverse classrooms now. We want to focus on being culturally responsive to our diverse classroom settings. So what strategies can we put in place to make sure we're reaching all of our students, okay? Today's teachers are tasked with educating increasingly diverse students as well as addressing their academic and social emotional needs. Thinking about my classroom structure, my demographics of my classroom, most of the time I have students that are your general ed, and you have some that need those special accommodations because we have collaborative teaching. And when we think about that, we have to focus on not just their social emotional needs, but then we also have to tie in to their culture. Students are different. As individuals, humans, we're different. So we want to make sure we recognize our differences and make sure we include it as part of the learning environment, okay? Knowledge of students' cultural backgrounds, things that would be interesting to include in your instruction that will make them feel that they're part of the group. So whenever we can acknowledge cultural backgrounds and tie in experiences, that would be a plus as well. Awareness of the social and economic context. All of us have our different needs. So when we think about economic context, we need to think about what is it I need to do for the individual student that may need additional assistance at home or need additional resources at home, need some type of, it could be the textbook that they need a take-home set. It could be if we're using different online resources. Do they have the internet and Wi-Fi at home, and will they be able to complete the assignment? If not, it's my requirement, my responsibility to tie in another accommodation where I'm making it so that the student can complete the assignments, even though they may not have some of the resources. So I have to look at other strategies I can use. Ability and willingness to use culturally appropriate management strategies. We always like incentives, but when we're trying to make sure those culturally appropriate management strategies are tied in, think about a person's background and think about things that they are in need of, okay? Commitment to building care, classroom communities. I always believe that relationship that you establish with the students can be lifelong, okay? When you establish those caring relationships, make sure you're interacting with each one of your students. Make sure that each one of your students feel comfortable that they can communicate with you when they do have a need. Just having it where, and I tell my students all the time, we're a family within this classroom. When one person needs something, it's our responsibility to make sure that we can do what we can to at least reach out and see what we can do to provide those resources. So building that family-oriented classroom, just like you have a family-oriented work environment, the classroom for the students is their work environment. So they need to feel that relationship where they're comfortable and they can trust, especially their teacher, as to how they can make their day more productive, how they make their academics more successful. So that's where that student accountability comes in. Creating that culture of trust and responsibility, setting high standards and clear expectations, giving your students ownership of the learning process, and I know that can be questionable at times because it depends on the level of students that you're teaching, but still giving them some type of ownership and accountability in their learning environment will turn out to be very productive and positive. Have students learn to self-assess their work. You know, we need to think about reflectives there. When a student does not completely understand something, they'll be hesitant on doing it. But when they can self-assess, figure out what is it they're struggling with, and reach out for assistance during those times, it will help the entire learning environment. And then connect the classroom to the home. Like I said a little while ago, your family within that classroom setting. So you want to make sure that you're doing things that the student feels comfortable, they feel that they can trust you, and they can actually be more productive in the learning environment. Okay? As we're aligning the rules to the positive and the negative consequences, teachers will find that expectations that are clear and are shared are essential to help foster the cause and effect relationship between the actions and the consequences. Meaning, when you do something positive, you get an incentive. There's an incentive for that, a reward. But when we have a negative behavior, there are some consequences that come along with it. An example of that would be a student that comes in and puts his head down, and if he does it at one time and the teacher talks to him and they say it just didn't feel well, but if it's a pattern that you begin to see and the student continues to put their head down during instruction, you will want to, the consequence would be, after talking to the student, you will want to contact the parent. You want to make sure you have contact guidance, and if the behavior continues, talking to the parent a lot of times will remedy the problem, because a lot of times the parent wants to know what's going on in the classroom, and they maybe can take away some type of activity that the student has at home. So when we say you want to tie it into that home environment, those incentives and the consequences, or the rewards and consequences, it directly helps your learning environment at school. When you say I'm going to contact the parent, for some students that does matter. And of course we know we're going to have some students where it doesn't matter, but when you have that type of situation where the student, feel that even if you contact the parent, it doesn't matter, that, they don't care about the consequences, that's when it's necessary for you to build that relationship with the student. Find out what is it that they do care about, and try to factor in that as you're aligning your rules and your procedures to enforce the positive, so you can deter from the negatives and have more rewards and incentives and fewer consequences, okay? But without clarity and a shared understanding, consequences feel biased, meaning that's where that consistency comes in. Make sure that you have consistent rules and procedures. Make sure they're clear and specific. They're clear to the students, so that they have a shared understanding, they have a shared accountability, and they are on board, okay? I assure you, these different things help to make you have a more productive learning environment. Okay? Then you question, all right, we teach the rules at the very beginning of the school year, and you see the behavior is good at the beginning, but then it starts to fall off a little bit. So when you think about when to reteach those behavior expectations, classroom management is essential, of course, from the first day of school to the very last day of school, okay? So you want to begin the year with positive routines and expectations. You want to make sure you maintain order and allow your students to develop as the year progresses. Before your students get too far away from the classroom routines, because as the year progresses, if you don't reteach or reinforce it, students will deter away from it. So before they get too far away from your routine and expectations, you want to make sure you take time to revisit those expectations. that's going to help you to maintain control and help your learning environment to continue to run smoothly. Smaller corrections now can save you a great deal of frustration and headache as the year progresses, okay? We want to make sure we model and practice the behavior, and we also want to make sure, as we reinforce those behavior expectations, that all students understand what's expected of them. And this last slide, I'm going to share this information with you all, but this last slide is just some information about the different resources that are used in the presentation. And I found them to be very beneficial, very informative. And I thank you for listening today, and I hope you heard something that was informative and that you can actually use in your classroom. Thank you.